Welcome back. You're watching a special broadcast here on DD India as part of our continuing coverage of India's Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi's ongoing visit to Russia. Remember, the two leaders, Mr. Modi and Mr. Putin, are in a delegation-level talks as we speak in Moscow. We'll get you the latest from Moscow from our correspondent on the ground, as well as guests who will join us over the next hour of this special broadcast. Joining me is my colleague Shubhendu.
Thank you, Ramesh. And we are focusing on Prime Minister's opening remarks in the closed-door talks that he is holding with President Vladimir Putin. Before I introduce to the guest, we should look at the kind of relationship that India and Russia have fostered together. Russia is a long-standing and time-tested partner for India since both countries raised their partnership to a strategic level in October of 2000. The ties have acquired a qualitatively new character: political, security, defense, trade, science and technology, culture and people-to-people ties are broad areas of their cooperation. Mihir Maikuri gets us more from New Delhi.
India and Russia share a long history of cooperation that dates back decades. Russia has been a long-standing and time-tested partner to India. Development of India-Russia relations has been a key pillar of India's foreign policy. The annual summit between the Prime Minister of India and the President of the Russian Federation is the highest institutionalized dialogue mechanism in the strategic partnership between India and Russia. India and Russia share deep historical roots, significantly strengthened by Prime Minister Narendra Modi during his tenure as Chief Minister of Gujarat. Now let's take a look at the growing ties between India and Russia. PM Modi's first visit to Russia on the 6th of November 2001, when he was Chief Minister of Gujarat. PM Modi accompanied the then Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee to Moscow for India-Russia summit with President Vladimir Putin. During this visit, the then Chief Minister Modi signed a protocol pact for cooperation between Gujarat and Astrakhan. They agreed to work together in the fields of diverse sectors including trade, education, petroleum and hydrocarbon sectors, science and technology, tourism and culture. In 2006, the then Chief Minister visited Astrakhan and met the Governor Alexander Zilkin. The protocol pact for cooperation was extended for another 5 years. In 2009, he was invited to address the 4th International Energy Week and the 9th Russian Oil and Gas Week conference. Since 2014, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi has placed special emphasis on strengthening India-Russia ties, boosting relations across various sectors. 60% of trade between India and Russia is now done in national currencies. Bilateral trade is set to reach an all-time high of $65.7 billion in FY 22-23. Key exports from India include pharmaceuticals, organic chemicals and iron and steel. Major commodities imported from Russia include oil, petroleum products and fertilizers. India-Russia bilateral investments surpassed the previous target of $30 billion in 2018. The revised target of $50 billion has been set for 2025. Now let's take a look at the defense ties. Biennial joint military exercises titled Indra conducted between the armed forces of India and Russia. India holds a 2+2 dialogue with Russia involving foreign and defense ministers. Indian Army has Russian tanks like T-72 and T-90. The Indian Air Force also has variants of MiG-21, Su-30 and MiG-29 aircraft in its fleet. The Russian President Vladimir Putin has always praised PM Modi's leadership. PM Modi also calls Russia a time-tested partner. This visit has taken the ties of the two countries to a new high. Mihir Maikuri's report, DD India.
All right, joining us is Mr. Prabhu Dayal. Mr. Dayal is a former Indian ambassador. He joins us from New Delhi. Ambassador Dayal, welcome to this special broadcast. Now, as we speak, the two principals are holding delegation-level talks in Moscow. But India's Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, has already spoken. He made very significant remarks a short while ago, especially in light of the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict. Mr. Dayal, the Prime Minister says that the resolution of the conflict cannot take place on the battlefield, number one. Number two, he says they've had free and candid talks and exchanged quote-unquote interesting ideas, and that there is a quote-unquote new thinking that's come to the fore, and that India will do its utmost to bring about peace in the region at large. Your thoughts on how these talks are shaping up?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on your show.
Welcome.
the Prime Minister made a number of very important statements. And his message comes out from the visit itself. Let me state that whenever there is such a high-level visit in the world of diplomacy, people try to see what the big messages are. Through this visit, messages have gone loud and clear, firstly to Russia itself, and secondly to a whole host of other countries. Of course, you rightly referred to Prime Minister's call for dialogue and diplomacy for resolving the Russia-Ukraine conflict. But this is something he has done consistently. He had told President Putin earlier that this is not an era of war. So he has always counseled peace. And I'm sure that in their interaction, there was a lot that was said and discussed about how this war between Russia and Ukraine can be brought to an end. The Prime Minister is a person who's a messenger of peace. He's tried to bring about peace in a whole host of other situations. And as the Bible says, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God. He is one such person who tries to counsel peace. And I think his advice is taken seriously because of the very high standing that he enjoys in the international arena. Now, there were, of course, very clear messages to the Russians. You know, there have been some misgivings within Russia that India is distancing itself from Russia and is drawing closer to the West. However, let me mention that Prime Minister chose Russia for his first bilateral visit after he's been sworn in for the third term. And throughout his visit, in all his statements, he has emphasized the strong bond between India and Russia. Very, very significantly and in a very interesting way, he showed how every Indian recognizes that Russia is India's all-weather friend when he said, "Dukh dukh ka sathi, Russia." So there is a mutual trust, and the Prime Minister highlighted that. Now, of course, I must also mention that Prime Minister Modi was pointing out the direction for the relationship in the future. He said, "I am confident that our ties will see the further strengthening in coming years." And I think in his opening remarks to President Putin, he acknowledged that Russia has supported India's scheme, you know, the Make in India scheme. And as an aside to this, Russia's Rosatom was in talks with India about building 6 more nuclear power units. So there is a direction in which Prime Minister Modi is taking the India-Russia relationship. And he again highlighted another aspect that that India would be opening 2 new consulates. So the message is loud and clear. We are not distancing ourselves from Russia. Russia is a time-tested friend. At the same time, there were some messages to other countries too. You know, China is the elephant in the room. China is a country which poses a lot of problems for us at the line of actual control. And China has been somehow trying to send across the message that the relationship between China and Russia is becoming increasingly closer. And there have been voices within India which have voiced concern about whether this will impact the India-Russia relationship, or whether the Russian friendship with China will have a bearing on China's relations with India. But I think Prime Minister Modi was able to amplify the nature of the India-Russia relationship, and if anything, I think this way encourage President Putin to try to moderate the Chinese attitude towards India. In other words, it's always good to have a common friend, and President Putin is a common friend for China as well as for India. So this factor may certainly work in the context of easing tensions between China and India. Now, may I also mention how this visit sends a message to the Western countries. You know, India has pursued an independent policy. Somehow, sometimes the wrong impression is being given that India is now closer to the West. Let me mention that there are concerns about how the West is trying to utilize this impression to its advantage. I may mention Canada and the United States. Canada, because how it has used the Khalistani issue to build pressure on India. It has blamed India for the assassination of Hardeep Singh Nijjar without having furnished any proof. And at the same time, the United States has also tried to play some games. So India is a very major power. India is the world's fifth largest economy and inching towards becoming the world's third largest economy. So we are not going to let anyone play games with us. So if there was a message which the West was trying to send that perhaps we are closer to them and therefore we are distancing ourselves from Russia and they can take advantage of this, the message is sorry, we are a country which follows an independent policy. We are close to all friends and we will judge issue on merits. So I think the messages which have gone out from the visit are very, very significant.
Ambassador Prabhu Dayal, we'll continue our conversation. Let's once again take a look at what Prime Minister said in his opening remarks while engaging with President Vladimir Putin. India's Prime Minister Modi and Russian President Vladimir Putin held talks in Moscow. Both leaders held discussions on a wide range of issues. Prime Minister asserted that India-Russia relations are now even more strong because of efforts of President Putin.
Now, speaking on the Ukraine conflict, Prime Minister Modi said that solution cannot be found on the battlefield and that dialogue and diplomacy is the only way.
शांति की बहाली में भारत हर संभव सहयोग करने के लिए तैयार है और आपका भी सानुकूल विचार सुनकर के मुझे बहुत खुशी हुई और मैं भी आपको भी आश्वस्त करता हूं और विश्व समुदाय को भी आश्वस्त करता हूं कि भारत शांति के पक्ष में है और शांति के लिए मेरे मित्र राष्ट्रपति पुतिन की कल बातों को सुनकर के मेरे मन में एक आशा पैदा हुई है और मैं इसके लिए आपका बहुत-बहुत धन्यवाद करता हूं.
In his remark, Prime Minister thanked Russia for providing fertilizer to India. He added that growing cooperation between the two nations will benefit the farmers.
रूस मित्रता के कारण जब दुनिया फूड, फ्यूल एंड फर्टिलाइजर के संकट से गुजर रही थी, हमारी मित्रता और हमारे सहयोग के कारण मैं मेरे देश के किसानों को फर्टिलाइजर में मुसीबत में नहीं आने दिया. फर्टिलाइजर की उनकी जो आवश्यकता है उसकी पूरी करने में हम सफल रहे और उसमें हमारी मित्रता का भी बहुत बड़ा रोल है और किसानों के हितों की रक्षा के लिए हम कमिटेड हैं.
Prime Minister Modi also lauded the Russian cooperation in fulfilling the need of fuel, not just for Indian citizens, but also for everyone around the globe.
आपके सहयोग के कारण भारत में हम सामान्य नागरिक को पेट्रोल, डीजल की आवश्यकताओं में कठिनाइयों से हम बचा पाए. इतना ही नहीं, विश्व को ये बात स्वीकार करनी होगी कि भारत और रूस का फ्यूल के संबंध में जो एग्रीमेंट रहा उसने दुनिया को भी एक प्रकार से मार्केट में स्टेबिलिटी देने का इनडायरेक्टली बहुत बड़ा काम किया है.
And Ambassador Prabhu Dayal continues to be with us. Ambassador Dayal, there was a lot of anticipation around the manner in which the Ukraine conflict could be discussed or articulated by the two leaders. What Prime Minister said, we see a continuation of India's position when Prime Minister had earlier said this is not an era of war, to present day India playing a role towards a peaceful resolution.
You know, Prime Minister Modi has counseled peace in all situations of conflict. You would recall that when he met the President of Israel on the sidelines of the COP summit in Dubai, he had counseled him to have the path of diplomacy adopted by Israel and emphasized the need for finding a solution. So similarly, in the context of the Russia-Ukraine war, Prime Minister Modi has counseled the need for dialogue and diplomacy because this is the only way the war can be brought to an end. Let me mention that this war has now gone on for over 2 years, 2 years and a few months. And it is having a very, very adverse impact on most countries. There was a reference to trade just now, and I think Prime Minister Modi also quoted something in this context. You know, trade between India and Russia has been growing, and there are attempts to take the volume of trade even higher. What we import from Russia are items which are very important for us. Firstly, defense-related equipment. You know, we live in one of the most dangerous environments in the world, and we need as much state-of-the-art weaponry as we can get. And of course, we also need spares for the defense systems which we had earlier required from Russia. Secondly, we are importing fertilizers, and I cannot overstate the importance of fertilizers for us because we need it for our agriculture. Our agriculture depends heavily on imported fertilizer. Thirdly, now we are importing a lot of crude, and there are voices from within India which are criticizing our large imports of crude, and also voices from the West. But look, we are importing crude, and so a lot of that is processed here in India, refined here, and exported to Europe. So we are helping to meet Europe's energy requirements. So why should voices from Europe be critical of us? And of course, the energy imports from Russia also help us. So I think the nature of our imports is targeted towards meeting our requirements and also helping us to export petroleum products after processing crude here. So it is import, process, and re-export, which is a very, very good strategy. So I would like to mention that the direction in which the India-Russia relationship is proceeding is very, very good. It is based on sound analysis and very wise thinking. And I think that because of this, we are getting enough weightage as a global power. And therefore, if we say that this is not the era of war, if our Prime Minister emphasizes the importance of dialogue and diplomacy, the world has to listen. And I think that his visit will certainly contribute towards efforts to bring about peace between Russia and Ukraine.
Right. And Ambassador Dayal, just want to add to the question that I had put about the Ukraine conflict. It may appear that the ideas of dialogue and peaceful resolution is directed at President Putin alone. But we understand that the NATO meet is underway in the West in Washington, D.C. The message as much applies to the West as well, which has so far worked towards prolonging the conflict and not really a ceasefire or a resolution. Even the dialogue, the Ukraine peace dialogue in Switzerland did not have Russia, the main opponent, in that sense, a rather illogical way in which peace was being explored by the West. So this message also goes across the Atlantic as much as it does to the person across the table.
You're absolutely right. Such a message does go across. And if I may mention, a conference on peace in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, if it excludes Russia, then it's certainly taken adverse notice of in Russia. So if one of the parties to the conflict becomes adversely attuned towards reacting to this so-called peace conflict in Switzerland, then it is unlikely that such a conflict will be able to achieve anything in terms of moving towards peace. In fact, if anything, it might accentuate the conflict. It might lead to more polarization because the Russians are thinking that this conflict, this conference which is being held in Switzerland, is trying to work out strategies which would be designed against Russia. So it doesn't help if such conferences are taking place in the name of resolving the conflict, but are actually increasing hostilities and making peace more difficult. What our Prime Minister is trying to do is certainly a step in the right direction by counseling the two parties to move towards dialogue and diplomacy. He gave such advice to the Ukrainians, and I'm sure that he has repeated what his advice was to President Putin, that this is not an era of war. And Prime Minister's advice is taken in the right spirit because people know that he is sincere and he has the good of both parties when he tries to give any advice to end this conflict which is going on for over 2 years.
Ambassador Dayal, while we are waiting for the conferment of the order of St. Andrew the Apostle on the Indian Prime Minister and learn more about the deliverables from the India-Russia summit, I have to ask you about a related question. And that question, as you described, the elephant in the room, is China. Now, you spoke about the interplay of relations among India, Russia and the West. Let's talk a bit more at length, if you will, about China. How worried would India be at the growing ties between Russia and China, number one? And number two, do you think Russia can lean on China to moderate or modulate its behavior? I ask you this because President Putin spoke about the Russia, India, China trilateral in December 2021 when he visited New Delhi. And most recently, Foreign Minister Lavrov spoke about it too.
Well, you know, Russia can certainly play a very useful role in escalating the peace process and de-escalating tensions between China and India. But you know, the ball is in China's court.
Right.
They have built up their forces at the line of actual control. They have escalated tension, and they actually need to pull back because whatever we have done is to contain the dangers from their side. Our strategy is to hold the Chinese back. But it is the Chinese who are trying to push into our territory. So the buck stops with the Chinese. Now, there is no doubt that on account of the developments in the Russia-Ukraine war, Russia's dependence on China had gone up. However, if the Russians come to realize that India is equally vital to them, then they will not tilt unduly towards China. They would be more balanced. So our attempt is to ensure that there is a balanced Russian approach between India and China. And if anything, the Russians should be able to persuade the Chinese to de-escalate. Firstly, by pulling back the build-up that they have been responsible for at the line of actual control, and also by taking initiatives in the right direction. The Chinese keep talking of building relations in all areas, regardless of the tensions at the border, at the line of actual control. But we have been at pains to point out that there cannot be a development of the relationship in the right direction as long as there are tensions at the line of actual control. So the responsibility lies with China, and I hope that if the Russians are able to realize this, then they would help in making China having a relook at this policy which they've adopted, and thus bringing down the tensions between China and India.
Ambassador Prabhu Dayal, in the past couple of years, we've seen the manner in which energy trade, energy diplomacy has been a highlight of India-Russia partnership. Prime Minister goes on to say that, in fact, it played a role in stabilizing energy prices globally as well. Now, in his busy schedule visiting Russia, Moscow, Prime Minister visits an exhibition, Rosatom exhibition, focusing on nuclear advancements made by Russia. Is that a clear indicator of what to expect in terms of the engagements in the days to come as far as nuclear energy is concerned?
You know, I have read these reports that Rosatom is in talks with India about building 6 more nuclear power units. We have also emphasized to the Russians the importance we attach to the Make in India belief, the Make in India policy. So I'm sure that there is some discussion going on, not only on the building of new power plants here, but in ensuring that as large a percentage of the components are made in India. So it is something that would meet our requirements perfectly. We need certainly more nuclear energy because we are trying to move as rapidly as possible towards fossil fuel energy resources. And at the same time, we are trying to strengthen our manufacturing base, where the Make in India program will gel with these new power projects, the atomic power project, and meet the policy objectives which we have in mind. So I think that this is a very important direction, and the cooperation between Russia and India in the energy sector has been helping the world, as I pointed out, because if we are importing Russian crude, processing, and exporting petroleum products to countries in Europe, and then whatever we are doing is helping to meet the energy requirements of these other countries. So our cooperation with Russia is benefiting not only our two countries, but a whole host of other nations too.
Ambassador Dayal, among the many regional issues that could figure in their talks between Prime Minister Modi and President Putin, do you think Afghanistan would be among the topics of discussion, given the fact that Russia has indicated that it will lift its ban on Taliban and that it might engage more with the ruling force or dispensation in Kabul? Does that would that interest India?
Well, India's ties with Afghanistan are age-old. And the Afghans realize that India is a threat. We have helped them in a variety of ways. Now, at the moment, the Taliban regime is not accepted by a whole host of other countries. And the reason for this is that the policies of the Taliban are such that there are questions raised about human rights, about the rights of women in particular, and about certain other aspects of the internal and the external policies of Afghanistan. So if India can engage in a dialogue with Afghanistan and also with Russia and see how the Afghans can be made to increase their acceptability and see how the Russians can help in this regard, certainly it would be a win-win situation for everybody. The Afghans would profit out of it. The world would be better off with an Afghanistan which correlates with other countries. And I think the Russians would also be happy with that. So if we have any talks with the Russians in regard to Afghanistan, I'm sure that the direction would be very positive and towards ensuring that Afghanistan can be brought back into the mainstream of international political activity.
Ambassador Prabhu Dayal, as Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Vladimir Putin engage in bilateral conversation, how do you see also the particular role of these two leaders in steering the relationship between India and Russia forward? 17 times across in 10 years, the leaders have met, is what Prime Minister said. I also asked this question in the context of the highest civilian award that is expected to be conferred on Prime Minister Modi in a short while from now.
I think Prime Minister Modi enjoys high respect in Russia. There is absolutely no doubt about it. I saw the visual coverage which you gave to the visit, and the warmth which was exhibited by the Russian side was indeed very striking. Now, President Putin, at one time was believed to be on shaky ground when things were not going so well for the Russians in their conflict with Ukraine. But there is no doubt that he has re-established his firm grip on Russia. And there is no denying the fact that, while of course nothing can be said for sure ever in the international political arena, but looking at things as they stand, it seems that he is the only real political force in Russia, and that he says some things which matter to the Russians and they take his word seriously. So in other words, President Putin is primus inter pares within Russia. Prime Minister Modi is respected highly in Russia, as indeed he is in most of the other countries of the world. Prime Minister Modi has been consistently voted as the world's most popular leader by a number of global surveys. So, since you have the most important leader within Russia and one of the most important and popular leaders of the world talking to each other, surely the results of the conversation would be far-reaching. And I'm sure that Prime Minister would be able to ensure that these results benefit us, benefit the Russians, and also benefit the rest of the world.
Ambassador Dayal, do stay on. We'll come back to you momentarily. In the meantime, Shubhendu, why don't we recap for our viewers what's transpired in the last several hours as part of Prime Minister's ongoing visit to Russia. Now, earlier in the day, while interacting with the Indian community in Moscow, Prime Minister Modi said the world is amazed by the speed of development in India over the last several decades.
And he said that India is changing because it believes in the abilities of its 1.4 billion people.
आने वाले 10 साल और भी फास्ट ग्रोथ के होने वाले हैं। सेमीकंडक्टर से इलेक्ट्रॉनिक मैन्युफैक्चरिंग तक, ग्रीन हाइड्रोजन से इलेक्ट्रिक व्हीकल तक और वर्ल्ड क्लास इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर, भारत की नई गति दुनिया के विकास का, और मैं बहुत जिम्मेवारी से कह रहा हूं, दुनिया के विकास का अध्याय लिखेगी। आज ग्लोबल इकोनॉमी की ग्रोथ में 15% भारत कंट्रीब्यूट कर रही है।
And Prime Minister Modi reiterated 21st century is India's century. He further added that India is a strong pillar in the multipolar world.
आज विश्व बंधु के रूप में भारत दुनिया को नया भरोसा दे रहा है। भारत की ग्रोइंग कैपेबिलिटीज ने पूरी दुनिया को स्टेबिलिटी और प्रॉस्पेरिटी की उम्मीद दी है। न्यू इमर्जिंग मल्टीपोलर वर्ल्ड ऑर्डर में भारत को एक मजबूत पिलर के रूप में देखा जा रहा है। जब भारत पीस, डायलॉग और डिप्लोमेसी की बात कहता है तो पूरी दुनिया सुनती है। जब भी दुनिया पर संकट आता है तो भारत सबसे पहले पहुंचने वाला देश बनता है और भारत दुनिया की उम्मीदों को पूरा करने के लिए कोई कसर नहीं छोड़ेगा।
All right, joining us is our colleague Amritpal Singh. Amrit, how would you characterize the ongoing visit of the Indian Prime Minister to Russia, given what we know so far?
Well, the meat of the visit is in the ongoing talks that are happening between the two sides. We heard the opening remarks of both Prime Minister Modi and President Putin, and the Foreign Secretary would brief the media on what transpired exactly in these talks. And after the talks, there is a exchange of documents, so we'll know that what written agreements were exchanged between the two countries. But what we know so far is that, especially from the Prime Minister's opening remarks on that one-on-one meeting between President Putin and Prime Minister Modi, that Prime Minister very categorically conveyed to the Russian President once again, though this time the words were a little different from what he used at Samarkand at that SCO meeting, where he famously remarked that this is not the era of war. He told President Putin that the solutions to the conflict cannot be found in the battleground, and dialogue and diplomacy, which is the only way forward. This has been India's consistent stand. Also, he said that India is ready to support all efforts to get peace and would do anything that is expected of India to get a peaceful resolution to the conflict. Also, I think the other things that he spoke about, say on terrorism, condemning all forms of terrorism, citing that India has itself been a victim of terrorism for long, and therefore the world must take a united stance against terrorism. Thirdly, he conveyed that India's gratitude to Russia for extending help in terms of providing fertilizers. If you remember, 48 lakh tons of fertilizers were imported from Russia last year alone, and saying that this contributes to food security. On the fuel security, on the energy security, he said that the world had issues, especially he didn't use the term Western world, but he said the world had issues on India importing crude oil from Russia, but they've come to understand and respect the agreement that India and Russia have, because it has not only brought about energy security to India and its citizens, but to the world in a roundabout fashion, because India refined the crude that it got to Russia and then it was selling it in the European markets. So clearly, that if the conflict disrupted global supply chains and created energy insecurity and food insecurity around the world, here is that you tripped the circuit and it went through India. So India's played that role, and he sort of signaled that he would look to strengthening this partnership in the coming months and years ahead. So I think this is what is transpiring. Of course, I think Kudankulam, India's defense and strategic relationship with Russia would figure prominently in the talks. We are awaiting briefing on the talks, and we are also awaiting that what documents are exchanged, MOUs are signed between the two sides at the end of this visit. Ramesh?
Right, Amrit, stay with us while we go across to Ambassador Prabhu Dayal. Ambassador Dayal, the highlights that Amrit mentioned, I particularly want to talk about the issue of terrorism. It's interesting that Prime Minister, even before he spoke about the bilateral high points between India and Russia and the global geopolitics, he raises the issue of terrorism, talks about how India understands what Russia went through when the terror attacks in the country took place. If we go back a few days at the SCO summit, which Prime Minister did not attend in person, in his statement that was delivered by External Affairs Minister, right on top was the mention of the global menace of terrorism. India leaves no opportunity to raise the issue of terrorism on any platform, and this time over, it was no different.
Well, indeed, India has been in the forefront of this war against terrorism. And one reason for that is that no other country has suffered so consistently from terrorist attacks directed against us as India has. And there is no secret that Pakistan indulges in state-sponsored terrorism. Their entire policy is directed at hurting India, and since it cannot take on India in a headlong conflict, it indulges in this policy of undertaking proxy warfare through terrorist organizations. Pakistan has been exposed globally. But the important point is that we have tried to raise global awareness about the menace of terrorism. And that is why we pioneered the resolution on terrorism in the United Nations. Unfortunately, that resolution is still in the works. It has not been adopted because a number of countries, including, of course, Pakistan, try to project the point of view that the terrorists are actually freedom fighters and that they should not be denounced in the Convention Against Terrorism, but their point of view should also be understood. So the point is that there are nuisance elements like Pakistan, which of course get abetment from their benefactors like the Chinese. But by and large, the world has begun to realize that terrorism is a global menace and that participants in acts of terrorism need to be very sternly dealt with. Russia has also suffered from terrorist attacks, as you mentioned, but so have a whole host of other countries. The United States has not escaped terrorism. Of course, they always speak about 9/11, the attacks on the Twin Trade Towers, but they have suffered from a number of other attacks also. So they're also beginning to realize, and they're changing their soft policy, which they took vis-a-vis Pakistan, for instance, and they're beginning to realize that terrorism is a menace which must be ended. Now, earlier in our conversation, we were talking about India's independent policy. You know, why India's voice is heard by other nations is because we are seen to be pursuing an independent policy. On the one hand, we are invited as a guest country in the G7 summit for the last 5 consecutive terms. We are a member of Quad, and at the same time, we are a member of BRICS, and we are a member of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Now, which other country can fit the bill that India is able to? We are equidistant. We are friends on both sides. We pursue an independent foreign policy, and our policy is based on our interests. So there is this realization that we don't speak on behalf of any particular group. And that is why, as our Prime Minister said, India's voice is listened to. What India says, other countries do pay heed to. It's a pity that we are not a permanent member of the UN Security Council. But that is a reflection on the poor nature of the manner in which the UN Security Council functions. The UN Security Council needs to be reformed. But because of the fact that the P5 can veto any structural change in the Security Council, no reform is possible. The fact of the matter is, we are able to still accomplish a lot in the global system without being a member of the UN Security Council because our voice and our advice is taken seriously by a whole host of other countries.
Indeed. Amrit, while we are waiting for the deliverables or outcomes from the India-Russia summit in terms of, one, the text of a joint statement, and two, the signing of MOUs towards the end of those talks. One announcement has already been made. Prime Minister Modi announcing a few hours ago that India has decided to set up 2 new consulates at Kazan and Ekaterinburg. You think that will help to promote and encourage people-to-people ties as well as commercial relations?
Absolutely, Ramesh. The consulate's job, in fact, Ambassador Dayal can, talk more about it, is one, to facilitate travel of people by granting visas. So that helps a lot in, promoting tourism, establishing people-to-people contacts. The other is the business aspect of it, the commercial aspect of it, increasing trade from these areas into India and vice versa. Russia being a huge country, almost a continent, so in fact it spans over 2 continents. So it's different parts have different resources. So exchange of those resources in terms of commerce would greatly boost the bilateral trade between the 2 countries, and of course increase people to people contact between the peoples of both countries. Ramesh.
Also, Amrit, as far as engagement between Russia and India are concerned, defense partnership is seen as one of the key highlights. Very recently, we've seen the successful manufacturing and handing over of the joint venture advanced rifles to the Indian Army. There is, of course, talks on the S-400 systems. What are you picking up regarding the expectations this time over, the manner in which the defense partnership is expected to be taken forward?
Well, the defense partnership between India and Russia, dates back to the defense partnership between India and the erstwhile USSR. In fact, it's increased. Till date, Russia is your largest military supplier of military equipment, though it has considerably come down as you assert yourself more on strategic autonomy and therefore widen your basket. But all wings of the military, look at the Indian Air Force, say it has about 11 to 12 squadrons of the Su-30s. This time around, they're talking about the 5th generation Russian aircraft, the Su-57. You talked about the S-400 missile systems. Your aircraft carrier is what was once Admiral Gorshkov. Your nuclear submarine of the Navy is on lease from Russia. So, T-90s, the main war horse of your land forces, is Russian. So clearly, this partnership is there. Of course, they would want to increase that partnership. Both sides are interested. Russia is ready to offer you technology, avionics, even there are ongoing talks on, as I said, on Su-57. So we'll have to see that during this visit what materializes in terms of hard agreements. But yes, defense and strategic cooperation would form the core of the relationship. And then apart from defense, yes, of course, the civil nuclear cooperation that you have between the 2 countries, because the 2 units of the Kudankulam nuclear project are at advanced stages of production. So, I think that would also be a key focus where Prime Minister Modi would press upon President Putin that this relationship remains sustainable and is expanded further in that area. Shubhendu?
Ambassador Dayal, talking about Kazan, since we're on the subject of Kazan and India wanting to set up a new consulate in Kazan, Kazan will host the 2024 BRICS summit later this year. Russia is the current chair of BRICS. Do you think BRICS as a global grouping, it's coming into its own and it serves India's interests and that of the global south well?
Well, India has established itself as a country which pursues an independent foreign policy. Now, BRICS is a very important global institution because it comprises important players such as Russia, China, South Africa, Brazil, and now with the expansion of BRICS, it will also include Iran, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Ethiopia, and UAE. So these are all important countries in their own right. And we have tried always to use all fora which are available to us, whether it's BRICS or whether it's the G7 where we go as a guest country or the G20. We have tried to emphasize the need for global peace and a greater understanding of the needs of the countries of the global south. We have done so consistently. So if BRICS provides us an opportunity to enunciate our position on different issues, then it is certainly something that we welcome it, and that is why our participation in BRICS has been very, very consistent. Now, let me also revert briefly to what you were discussing with Amritpal about the defense aspect of the relationship. You know, India's defense requirements are perhaps unmatched. We are the world's biggest importer of defense equipment because we live in the most hostile environment in the world. We have got Pakistan on one side, we have got China, and then to make things worse, we also have the Indian Ocean, where the Chinese presence is threatening not only us, but all the countries of the Indo-Pacific region. Now, we have an interest in the containment of China, and therefore we need to have state-of-the-art weapons, and we acquire it from wherever we can do at the best possible terms. We have been originally buying a lot from the Soviet Union, later from Russia, because other sources were not available. But then when other countries reached out and we found that we are able to meet our defense requirements better with some imports from these countries, we have diversified our sources of supply. There's nothing wrong with that. I think it blends very well with our overall foreign policy. Of course, our dependence on Russia cannot be wished away. It cannot go away. We have a lot of Russian equipment, and we will always need spares. There is this theory that is touted that Russian defense systems are not as state-of-the-art as those of the West. But I think there are lots of falsehoods in this argument. There are many Russian defense systems which are also very good. So, to cut the long story short, we will source our needs, we will source the supplies from wherever we find the terms to be the best and wherever we find the equipment to be suitable for our requirements. And that is the key of our defense acquisition policy.
We continue with this conversation, but let's once again turn to some excerpts of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's opening remarks in his conversation with President Putin. Prime Minister Modi said India has been facing terrorism for long. He also mentioned the recent terror attack on Russia and condemned all kinds of violence and terrorism.
एक्सेलेंसी पिछले 40-50 साल से भारत आतंकवाद को झेल रहा है। आतंकवाद कितना भयानक होता है, कितना घिनौना होता है, वो हम 40 साल से भुगत रहे हैं।
इसको फ्री करना है।
ऐसे में जब मॉस्को में आतंकवादी घटनाएं घटी, दोगेस्तान में आकर आतंकवाद की घटनाएं घटी, उसका दर्द कितना गहरा होगा इसकी मैं कल्पना करता हूं और मैं हर प्रकार के आतंकवाद की घोर निंदा करता हूं।
Right, we still have with us our guest, Ambassador Prabhu Dayal, and my colleague Amritpal Singh to walk you through the remainder of this special broadcast on the ongoing visit of India's Prime Minister to Russia. Amritpal Singh, coming back to you, what are you picking up about the ongoing talks, the summit-level talks in Moscow? When can we expect a joint statement, and what might be in it?
We can expect the talks to finish in another 20 minutes from now. That's the time schedule. Right now, after the one-on-one meeting or the restricted meeting between the two principals, the two sides have gone in for delegation-level talks. After that, we will see the signing of documents, press statements by the two leaders, and of course, the joint statement which would follow later. The joint statement, in my opinion, would cover the entire gamut of the relationship. One, how they wish to increase their trade, diversify their trade. Second, it would have a significant part on defense and strategic cooperation between the two sides. This joint statement could have given the requirement of energy security and green sources of energy, nuclear cooperation, civil nuclear cooperation between the two sides would remain a significant component of the relationship. Also, one could, see terrorism, condemning terrorism and a joint effort to defeat the scourge of terrorism or eliminate the scourge of terrorism, see mention in the joint statement. So I think these are the areas that could reflect in the joint statement as far as I can pick up, Ramesh.
There, Amrit, thanks very much for joining us with those updates, and the talks between President Putin and Prime Minister Narendra Modi continue. Ambassador Prabhu Dayal, before we conclude, just one thought on the idea of multipolarity and the kind of force that India and Russia and the partnership represents in that domain. We understand the two countries operate in various multilateral platforms. We talked about BRICS, G20, there is SCO as well. What hope do they hold together for a multipolar world to exist and thrive?
There has to be multipolarity, because that is how the world is shaping out. Now, let me recall that last year in May, Prime Minister Modi visited Japan. After that, he visited Australia. In June, he visited the United States. In July last year, he visited France. So it was very important to send the right signal that we have a balanced foreign policy. We are not tilting to one side. And therefore, his visit to Russia now, after being re-elected Prime Minister of India for the third term, this visit is very significant. It emphasizes our belief in multipolarity. It emphasizes the independent foreign policy we pursue. And it also emphasizes the relevance of India in the global system.
All right, on that note, Ambassador Prabhu Dayal, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your thoughts and insights with our viewers at home and abroad. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it. And with that, it's a wrap on this special broadcast on DD India.
You can get all the latest news and updates on DD India mobile app. It's available on Android and iOS platforms. You can scan the QR code on the screens to download it. We'll show that QR code.
And let us know your thoughts on the news of the day. There we go, the QR code on your screens right now. You can connect with us on Facebook, X and Instagram. You can also check out our website, ddindia.co.in.
And we'll be back with more news as it breaks here on DD India from all of us here in New Delhi. Thanks for watching DD India. DD India, sports to the world. Namaskar.